Okay, so welcome everybody. It is New Year's Eve 2024. My name's Auntie Jill, and this is the regular meeting of our No More Relapse group. And we have, we're in Bill's story. And just to recap, we've been going over Bill for the first time, addressing the fact that he's powerless over alcohol. Last time we went over how gradually things got worse for Bill, so we see the progression of the disease. And we also see that relapse for him and for most of us is moving back into self-will. No, thinking that we can run the show, that we can handle alcohol or anything that is actually serving as our higher power. So, in other words, we move away from our spiritual higher power and move to a substance which becomes our higher power. Is that clear to everybody?
Mm-hmm.
It's being in self that this program is all about. You read every one of the prayers. Every one of these steps is based on getting out of self and being honest with ourselves. So we're at the bottom of page 5 in Bill's story. And just to make it clear from the very beginning, the first step or first homework that is on assignment for what we're reading tonight is to describe the insanity of your life when you're drinking or using. And that's where we are now at the bottom of page 5. So I'm going to start reading. Renewing my resolve, I tried again. And we're turning over to page 6.
Mm-hmm.
Some time passed, and confidence began to be replaced by cocksureness. Now, have you guys noticed how you get sober for a few days, you get through the ugly detox, you're humiliated, you're full of shame, you're full of resolve because you're still feeling really sick, and then as you start to feel a little bit better, confidence begins to be replaced by cocksureness.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes people call it a pink cloud. Sometimes, you know, it's just our mind taking control and going back into self again. And our resolve goes out the window. And again, reading. I could laugh at the gin mills. Now I had what it takes. One day I walked into a cafe to telephone. In no time, I was beating on the bar, asking myself, how did it happen? As the whiskey rose to my head, I told myself I would manage better next time, but I might as well get good and drunk then. And I did. Now, essentially, what that paragraph is ever said to yourself, well, I've had one, so and hit the effort button and just carried on. I've opened the
Mm-hmm.
bottle. Not if that sounds familiar to you guys. Oh, well,
Mm-hmm.
I've done it. The ability to pour out a bottle once we've opened it is darn near impossible for every
Mm-hmm.
alcoholic. Almost as difficult as it is to be truthful about the fact that we're drinking. We deny it, we lie, and we don't have the power to pour it out. Cunning, baffling, and powerful. There's no other disease that operates like this. So that's why we say don't pick up the first drink. If I pick up the first drink, I take the drink and then the drink takes me.
Mm-hmm.
So write that down in the margin next to this. I take the drink and the drink takes me. And the other thing I've heard you guys refer to numerous times, you might, for if this is appropriate to you, write in the margin of your book, I hit the effort button. Because I've heard that from each and every one of you that is relapsed. Is I just thought, well, now I've done it, so I really did it. And God willing, you're able to get back in here the next day. But as we also know in here, the experience is we can stay out until we have no more credit. So that is part of the insanity of this disease. If they don't find what we've got stashed, we'll drink it. If we can get away with getting into the cab, we go. Right? We've all proved this. You've all seen examples of this. And if we're in the middle of the holiday season, even more reason. Well, it's the holidays. You know, that is what you're drinking at. It is not what is causing us to drink. I can drink at anything. I can drink at Halloween. I can drink at Easter. I can drink at any family gathering, any gathering whatsoever. I can make any excuse in my own head. Pour me, pour me, pour me another drink. And I go back into self-pity and I go back into being the director. Okay, continuing reading. We're on page 6, the first full paragraph. The remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. Does anybody know what that means? Isn't the morning after horrid? If you've drunk to blackout like I did, what did I do? Who did I text? Who did I call? And talking to some of my sponsees, who am I with? I've received that phone call. You know, we end up in insanity. And this is another thing to think about with your homework. How many relationships, career decisions, geographics, how many big life decisions have we made because of our drinking choices? The company we keep, the company we choose, the friends we make, the people we date, the partners we end up with. Never would necessarily be in our life if they weren't drinking partners or my decision making hadn't been somehow affected by a substance. Straight and sober, wouldn't be with that person. Give me a few drinks, they look attractive. Okay, so that's what he's talking about there. The courage to do battle was not there. My brain raced uncontrollably, and there was a terrible sense of impending calamity. Okay, highlight that sense of impending calamity. Calamity means doomed or disastrous. I hardly dared cross the street, lest I collapse and be run down by an early morning truck, for it was scarcely daylight. An all-night place supplied me with a dozen glasses of ale. So he went from the first drink to 12 pretty darn quickly. My writhing nerves were stilled at last. In other words, he's getting that the top up drink that we know stops us from being ill and calms our nerves, or as Bill refers to it, the jitters. A morning paper told me the market had gone to hell again. So remember, Bill's a stockbroker, and we're dealing with the big variations in the stock markets in the 20s, right? Where the pre-depression. Well, it says the market had gone to hell again. Well, so had I. So Bill turned to the devil higher power of alcohol and turned away from the bright light white, of his higher power, which was trying to lead him to sobriety. The market would recover, but I wouldn't. Now that's a really poignant statement. Disasters happen in the world and the land recovers, but this is irreversible once we cross a certain line, yet we do it anyway. So remember that this is a fatal disease. This isn't something we're just dancing and playing around. You're fighting for your life. And I don't know if you're like me, but I somehow felt it was happening to another person. I felt a disassociation from this. I felt like, yeah, well, I'm not going to die. And I was actually kind of indifferent into the fact at the end whether I did or not. But part of me just didn't believe it would happen to me. And since being in these rooms, I can tell you, I've seen so many people die of alcohol poisoning, choking on their own vomit, overdosing, heart attacks, heart failures, and congenital, or not congenital, chronic defects of organs that have just can't take anymore. So he says, the market would recover, but I wouldn't. That was a hard thought. Should I kill myself? No, not now. Then a metal fog settled down. Gin would fix that. So 2 bottles and total oblivion. I want you to be looking for the insanity. And don't look for the differences. So even if you're not a stockbroker and you're not a man back in the 1920s, look at he knows the sense of impending calamity. He knows that there's some disastrous consequences about to befall him, but he does it anyway. The next paragraph, this is the last paragraph on page 6. The mind and body are marvelous mechanisms, for mine endured this agony 2 more years. Underline this agony 2 more years. That is part of the homework answer for step 1. What is that? Unmanageable. Due to alcohol. Sometimes I stole from my wife's slender purse when the morning terror and madness were on me. Bill has got to the point now. His wife is working in a store and he's not working at all. And she gets paid her wages and he goes and takes the money out of her purse, of which there is hardly any, and goes and buys booze. Again, I swayed dizzyingly before an open window or the medicine cabinet where there was poison, cursing myself for a weakling. He basically had sedatives and all sorts of things to try and counteract the effects of his alcohol. There were flights from city to country and back as my wife and I sought escape. So they're doing a geographic. They're running around trying to avoid what's going on. Then came the night when the physical and mental torture were so hellish, I feared I would burst through my window, sash and all. So he's living in the upper floor of his house at this time, where they were staying. So what does he do? Somehow I managed to drag my mattress to a lower floor, lest I suddenly leap. So part of him still wants to hang on to the life force, but it's not enough to stop him from drinking. A doctor came with, and now we're on the top of page 7, a heavy sedative. So they're using barbiturates and stuff to try and counteract the effects of the alcohol. Now it's gotten so bad. Next day found me drinking both gin and taking the sedative. What is that, guys? Begins with an I. Insanity. So I want you to stop and pause there for a second. And you know how you often see me putting my 2 hands level in front of me. Do you see that there is none of this? And for me, alcohol, opiates, whatever it was I was taking, I was trying to get here, I was trying to get there, but I was never here. I was never balanced. Because part of the thing you might want to reflect on is balance can be kind of boring. And if you're an alcoholic like me, I was causing such chaos, there was always drama around me. And if there wasn't drama, I now see where I would create it so that you weren't paying attention to me. And part of the time I was just so friggin' selfish, I didn't care how anything I did affected you one way or another. So it says this combination soon landed me on the rocks. And again, I'm reading from the top of page 7. People feared for my sanity. Now identify. Has anyone ever said you ought to go to rehab? Has anyone ever said to you, you drink too much? So other people can see this in you. And the crazy thing for me is I thought I was getting away with it. I had this stereotypical notion in my head of what an alcoholic looked like, and it wasn't me. So let's throw out the label. When we're drunk, we're drunks. And that is people now coming to me and saying, Jill, maybe you could back off a bit. The sort of things people say to you. So part of in your homework, when you're writing about your insanity, write down what other people have said to you and who said it. We're so selfish when we're wrapped up in our addiction. We don't actually know how deeply we're affecting other people. But if they got to the point that they're telling us, I have been called selfish, narcissistic, egotistical, and you know what? Every bit of it was true. And 80% of the people wouldn't even say anything to my face because they were afraid, because I have a strong personality, of how I would backlash. So reflect on that a little bit about the insanity and people telling you, because there's a disconnect in our brain. We somehow don't own what's really going on with us. Does that make sense to everybody in here? Looking in the mirror and taking a really honest look at ourselves is really tough for the alcoholic when we're still struggling. And then it says, last sentence, I could eat little or nothing when drinking, and I was 40 pounds underweight. Write about it. When you're drinking, do you eat properly? Are you underweight, bloated, with gout, of all the different things that go on? Think about what you're doing to your body and write about it. It's insanity. Okay, first full paragraph on page 7. My brother-in-law is a physician, and through his kindness and that of my mother, I was placed in a nationally known hospital for the mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics. Now, this was Towns Hospital in New York City, and today it would be an upmarket rehab center. Okay, but back then they were sanitariums because alcoholics at this point in time were considered incurable. It wasn't a disease. You were just locked away and you died an alcoholic death. Then it says, under the so-called belladonna treatment, my brain cleared. We don't need to go into details about that. It was drugs they were using at the time. They still use drugs to get us off alcohol in different forms today. Caution, some of them are equally as addictive as alcohol. I know from experience. Hydrotherapy and mild exercise helped much. Underline that. Hydrotherapy, drink water. Hydrate, 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 hydrate. Super important that you do this in early recovery. And mild exercise. Underline that right in the margin. Jill says go hug a tree. Even if that is your starting place, because that's where it was for me. And that wasn't Jill with having to have her feet fused because of the extreme osteoarthritis and bunions and such. This was Jill because she was that unused to walking. That's how far down the scale. That's all I could manage, was to go outside the building to the river and lean against a tree and get back to the house and feel ill. And then I had the shakes. Because remember, I detoxed from alcohol and opiates and antidepressants all at the same time. Not advised, but I know what you're feeling. I know what you've been through. The great thing news is I've never had to go back there and go through it again. Okay, so hydrotherapy and mild exercise help much. Best of all, I met a kind doctor who explained, though certainly selfish and foolish, I had been seriously ill, bodily and mentally. Okay, this is when he meets Dr. Silkworth. And Dr. Silkworth is the hero physician in this story. But I want you to know you have a disease. You are not a bad person. You are not morally bankrupt. You are not really all the things people are calling you. I am not the real Jill, the Jill 2.0, the sober Jill is not narcissistic. I am not stuck in ego. I am not selfish. I am not self centered. I certainly wouldn't have been sitting here New Year's Eve talking to a bunch of other people that have problems with drinking and drugs for nothing, like for free. Like this, it wouldn't even be something I'd consider. I'd already have had my bracing drinks to get ready for the party that I was going to make a complete ass of myself at. So know that this does work. You are seriously ill, bodily and mentally, but the solution is in doing the steps in this book for me. If you do what I did, you will come the other side of this. But you need, in my opinion, if you're as stubborn a relapser as I was, and you guys are relapsers, I needed to do what I was told without question, without negotiation, without second thinking. And I figured I needed to pretty much live in AA at the beginning. I was on meetings 4 or 5 hours a day, doing homework, immersed in reading this stuff. And part of it, I suppose, is a little bit narcissistic because I find myself fascinating, like most alcoholics do. All right, we're on the second full paragraph of page 7. It relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics, and underline this, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor. And I've written in the margin here because this really resonates with me. My own voice lies in my head telling me in my own voice, do it. It'll be okay. What other disease do we tell ourselves in our heads, in our own voice? It's okay, Gary. You can have one. It's all right, Leisha. You'll stop at one. It's okay, Amy. You don't finish that bottle. It's okay, Lori. You can just drink socially. It's okay. I mean, for me, maybe I could have gotten away with it that one night, but you better believe I woke up the dragon. And as soon as I started drinking again, the obsession occurred and the physical craving is renewed. We now know today, and we've recorded this elsewhere, so I can refer you to that with a link later, is that this is all scientifically proven to be a part of our physical makeup. We have a messed up enzyme, 10% of the population does. We also have done quite a bit of damage to our organs and our brain. But that's okay. We're now finding certain things are repairing themselves. So we'll move on from that. Okay, so it says it relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor, though it often remains strong in other respects. My incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. Understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. Basically, he was dry for 3 or 4 months. I went to town regularly and even made a little money. So he's been in rehab, he's gone out into society for 3 or 4 months, and he's even done a little bit of work to make some money. Surely this was the answer. Self-knowledge. Underline that. This is a trap. This is a trap. And right in the margin, self-knowledge avails us nothing. I know I'm an alcoholic, but that doesn't stop me from drinking. Write that in the margin. We all come on meetings and introduce ourselves and say we're alcoholics. That's the self-knowledge. But what do? You do it again, right? So all the book knowledge in the world that I amass about my condition is worth nothing until I actually begin to grasp that the solution is spiritual. The solution is spiritual. Next, second last paragraph on page 7. But it was not, for the frightful day came when I drank once more. Let's see, has anybody in here ever stopped for a few months and gone back out? Relate to Bill. I love this sentence and I've underlined it and highlighted it. The curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. The decline that Bill experiences is what each of us experience when we get to a certain point with our alcoholism. It's a progressive disease. If you get cirrhosis of the liver, you've crossed that point. That doesn't repair. If you get to a certain point of abusing your body, and I think we can all speak from knowledge here, we start to suffer the physical side effects of it. I never had gastrointestinal issues. I do now. And I'm sober years. But these are long-term effects of the disease that I have to deal with. After a time, I'm reading again, I returned to the hospital. This was the finish, the curtain, it seemed to me. My weary and despairing wife was informed that it would all end with heart failure during delirium tremens, the DTs, or I would develop a wet brain, die from having actually physically destroyed your brain, spongy brain. My father died with that and Lou Gehrig's. I have personal experience this. Perhaps within a year. It's a horrible death. If you have ever seen anyone die from the disease of alcoholism or go into alcoholic dementia, it is the cruelest blow. Because not only have we lived with the alcoholic through all of the struggles, we see them die in the worst possible way. And I don't know about you guys, but having witnessed it firsthand, I do not want to die that way. And even if that's the only reason I stopped drinking, it's good enough. But the answer, again, I repeat, is spiritual. So she would soon have to, he's referring to Lois, his wife. This is Bill Wilson writing. She would soon have to give me over to the undertaker or the asylum. And in the book, Pass It On, there's actually a copy of the do not resuscitate order that Lois writes for Bill this time, because they don't expect him to come out this time. Last paragraph on page 7. They did not need to tell me. I knew and almost welcomed the idea. It was a devastating blow to my pride. What? Okay, I'm on the top of page 8. It was a devastating blow to my pride. Can you see how insane this thinking is? How selfish he's still being? I, who had thought so well of myself and my abilities, of my capacity to surmount obstacles, was cornered at last. Now I was to plunge into the dark, joining that endless procession of sots. Sot is another word for drunks, who had gone on before. Alcoholism isn't a new disease. This has been going on for centuries. But unfortunately, nobody had the book until Bill had this experience and started writing it. I thought of my poor wife. There had been much happiness after all. What would I not give to make amends? But that was over now. So Bill's pretty sure he's dying here. And notice the first few sentences, this is just my observation, is still about him. His pride, how I think about myself, my capacity to surmount obstacles. And then as a throwaway, and then there's my poor wife. Next paragraph. No words can, okay, and I want you to circle in this entire paragraph. This is the homework answer for the question on powerlessness. No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. I called it, didn't I? What is the above paragraph? It's again all about me. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. Okay, this is also an answer to homework question on step one. Step one, alcohol was my master. And you can write in the margin, powerlessness over alcohol. Make note of this. Alcohol is Bill's higher power. Identify with it. Can you see where alcohol or the substance that you're abusing and or both are your higher power? Because it runs your life and it's going to lead to your death. For that, there is a certainty. So, as it says in How It Works, we beg of you, stop and get this. Reflect on this. If you don't connect with the spiritual part of this program, you will drink again. You can go through all these steps. We can jump into step 4 and make lists galore. But unless you have truly turned it over and said, no matter what, I'm turning this over to you, however your higher power is for you. Okay, so really important that you note the homework point on that for powerlessness for step 1. So even if you've done your homework, this is where it is in the big book. Okay, there's a number of places, but this is a key one. Then on the next paragraph, beginning trembling. Trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Again, broken man, another definition of being powerless. Fear sobered me for a bit. Okay, you guys see what's coming? Then came the insidious insanity of that first drink. Underline that. He's got all this self-knowledge, guys. He's read the books. He's in the best sanitarium. He knows that he's going to die from this disease. Then came that first drink. He has no healthy fear. He hasn't dealt with the source of his drinking. It's a spiritual malady. Of course he's drinking again, and so will we. I've proved that to myself by more relapses than probably all of you combined. Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or would stumble along to a miserable end. And that's what happens if we don't get better. People put us away, or they hand the responsibility of us off to other people. Has anyone suggested to you you move in with someone else? You move into a halfway house, you get a sober roommate, you go into a rehab center and stay there? Because at a certain point, they just decide, and it's true, we can't look after ourselves. Our fate is institutions, which can be jails, hospitals, sanitariums, rehab centers, and then the next choice for us is an early grave. The beautiful thing is, if we don't pick up the first drink, those options aren't what our fate is going to be. The trick is figuring out how to not pick up that first drink. Cunning, baffling, powerful. But in here, we find a way. The answers are in this book. Okay, so here he is. He's off again. I'm back in the middle of page 8. Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I'd have to be shut up somewhere or would stumble along to a miserable end. How dark it is before the dawn. Circle the dawn. This is Bill's spiritual awakening. This is where it gets better for Bill. In reality, that was the beginning of my last debauch, my last out, my last relapse. This is Bill's rock bottom, okay? And I've written in the column next to this, rock bottom is when I stop digging. Today can be your rock bottom. It doesn't ever have to be this bad for you again. He then says, and highlight this, I was soon to be catapulted. So that's like an old-fashioned, a thrust. I'm going to be rocketed into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. Now, we're going to hear more about this later. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. Highlight that in a joyful color and write in big letters, P with a circle around it. I do that in my book for the promises. I was to know and think about this. We've talked a lot about dying and disease and all the other things that we're enduring right now. But what I want to leave this session is you thinking about the hope end of it. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. Now read that sentence out loud. Do it now. And you can unmute yourself. I really want to hear you guys say this out loud because this is guaranteed for you. So can you unmute yourself?
I was to
And
know
this is where we're going
happiness,
to end.
peace,
So the
and
I was
sentence
to
is
usefulness
know
I was
happiness,
to
in a
know.
way of life
peace, and
that is
usefulness
incredibly
in a
more
way of life
wonderful
that is
as
incredibly
time
more
passes.
wonderful as time passes.
There you go, guys. I'm going to stop the recording.